Hi, and welcome to Bululu Wellness, your guide to well-being. Here, we simplify health with practical and easy-to-use tools to help you live a healthier life. Welcome everybody to Bululu Wellness, where we rebuild energy from the root, one conversation or episode at a time. And today I have Jamie with me, which is a practitioner from the Pacific Northwest. And I'm super honored to have you because I met you in the ANA Symposium in San Diego recently. And I loved your topic. I think it's so important to bring it forward. And I'm super excited to have you here. So welcome.
Thank you so much. I'm so honored that you asked me to be here. It was such a joy to meet you in San Diego and such a joy to be able to stay in touch and join you on your podcast.
Awesome. So for those who don't know you yet, can you share a little bit about you and what you do?
Yeah, I'm a certified nutrition specialist. And as you mentioned, based in the Pacific Northwest, I'm in Portland. And I specialize in the use of nutrition to support mental health in particular. So my talk in San Diego was on nourishing neurodivergence, so nutrition to support individuals with ADHD, which is something I feel passionate about, is supporting neurodivergent folks from a neuroaffirming perspective, as well as clients experiencing, regular run-of-the-mill depression, anxiety, challenges related to food relationship. And in addition to my clinical work, I also serve as adjunct faculty at NUNM here in Portland.
So, Jamie, I'm fascinated. I'm one of those people that love everything about nutrition for mental wellness because that was part of my story. But what truly inspired you to do this kind of work? Or do you have a personal story? How did you enter into this space and practice? Because, when we go to nutrition school and they say, okay, what is your niche? And we are all like, oh, what do we focus on? So what really inspired you to do this work?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think I was a little unusual in that I entered grad school knowing that I wanted to focus on nutrition for mental health. And I think part of that was just born out of my lived experience. I don't know if you've heard that adage of research is me search, but it really resonated with me when I came across that. And I feel like from an early age, some challenges associated with my own, experiences with depression and anxiety, trauma, you name it, and then identifying as neurodivergent now as an adult, I've been really looking for ways to support myself from like a holistic standpoint for a long time. And for me personally, a lot of what pharmacology offered to me as a young person just didn't really work. It came with side effects that were unmanageable and it just didn't really work. And I also, my mom makes jokes about how as a kid I was really annoying about also always saying, but why to everything. And I think that sort of has guided a lot of what I've been really interested in, trying to understand the root cause of what's going on. If I'm experiencing these like low mood or high mood, why is that? And I think from an early age, nature felt like medicine to me. That was one thing really early on that always kind of helped soothe whatever inner turmoil I was experiencing. And so sort of naturally, it led me to study Western herbalism and spending time as a hobby botanist and studying with several different herbalists on the West Coast and finding a lot of empowerment through that process too, being able to make my own medicine and help teach other people how to do that too. Felt really, I just reoriented to taking care of myself in a completely new way. I also though started to feel like it was a little bit like green allopathy. It's like giving a herb to treat a particular thing instead of still not answering that original question of like, why? Why am I feeling this way? And how can I feel better? What could be informing some of these symptoms instead of just putting band-aids on it, which I'll say there's absolutely a time and a place for a band-aid. And I think sometimes symptom management is important and that can be really valuable too. But I think long term, I was really curious about looking a little bit more deeply. And so thinking about my experience studying about herbalism, there's kind of a gray area between medicinal and culinary herbs anyway. So starting to think this seems like a real opportunity to integrate medicine, so to speak, multiple times every day. And these like microdosed, self-care moments of feeding my body the things that I need to feel my best. So then that led me to wanting to study nutrition and knowing so much about how changing the way that I ate changed the way that I felt. I just felt like I was so curious about the research and the science, and marrying that with lived experience and wanting to share that with other folks too.
That's amazing. And I did read somewhere, maybe correct me if I'm wrong, but you also did study psychology as well?
Yeah, I went to the Evergreen State College in Olympia for my undergraduate degree, where I studied psychology and sort of a general alternative psychology. I'm not sure if you're familiar with Evergreen, but they do narrative evaluations, and it's a really interesting, cool liberal arts college. And I learned a lot about myself, but I learned a lot about psychology too, as sort of a school of thought. And so that actually originally was what I thought I was going to do. I thought I wanted to be a psychologist, but then I got so much more into the biochemistry and the physical health side of things. And then, of course, back then, that was over 20 years ago when I was an undergrad, it was considered somatic psychology. And there was like not really the same idea that we have these days that we almost take for granted, where people appreciate the brain and the body are connected. You can't really disconnect the two, but back then it was still sort of early days when starting to think about like, oh, how you feel can affect how you physically feel and vice versa. And so that I think the seed was planted very early on, and I took a little bit of a roundabout way to get there, but ultimately I feel like I'm still interested in the same thing I was back then, but looking at it more, I think root cause.
So when you hear the term integrative or integrative health, what it come or what means to you? Because it sounds like, from psychology, and then those questions of the why, and the why goes to herbalisms or herbs, or and then the why goes to nutrition. So can you explain that? Because that also resonates so much with me, and I feel like we're always learning.
Yeah, I do too. And that's what I actually really love about the field of nutritional psychology writ large, is that it's still sort of a nascent field. So there's evidence and research coming out in real time from these amazing laboratories around the world. So in terms of a niche or a field of study to be interested in, there's just no limit to what we can learn. Um, in terms of integrative care, I think to me, it feels like taking the best of both worlds if we were to like separate it into a false dichotomy between like allopathy and functional medicine, marrying the two, and from a really non-judgmental and client-centered perspective, honoring whatever choices make the most sense for that given person, and being able to use the tool and a combination of tools in a way that's really personalized for each person. I think 20 years ago, I was a little bit more, I would just say like one-dimensionally critical of Western medicine. That informed a lot of my love for botany and Western herbalism. And I think I've like kind of come around to understanding and appreciating that there's really a time and a place for everything. And I think that Western medicine has a lot of tools that are absolutely life-saving. And I just never want any of my clients to feel like they're going to be judged from me by whatever choices they're making for their body and their brain at that time. I think whatever choice they want to make, I can figure out a way to support them. I can either offset some of the adverse side effects of some pharmacological tools they might be using, or address root cause, like nutrient deficiencies that might be worsening symptoms they're experiencing. So they might be able to reduce the dose of the pharmacology, or they might not. Maybe that's just something that we want to leave alone, but make sure that they're just fed, that they have enough of the nutrient building blocks to just feel like they're their best self and can do the things that they want to do day to day. And so to me, it's really looking at all these tools without judgment and no hierarchy. They just exist, and allowing people to make the right choice for them and then supporting that choice.
I love that. And so, for the person that might be listening that still is not really sure of what, nutritional psychology is, I don't know if that's the correct term or usage of the term, but can you describe in simple terms, right? Like if a person is asking you, hey, Jamie, what do you do? And then you just go nutritional psychology or things like that. How can you explain it, or how can you describe your approach in the most simple of terms?
Yeah, it's a good question, because sometimes, I don't know about you, but I get stuck in my bubble. So sometimes I take for granted, I'm like, oh yeah, we all just have this lingo. We know exactly what we're talking about, but we don't even all agree on what functional nutrition means, right? So I think it's really helpful to just describe what certain things mean to each of us as individuals. So nutritional psychology, and you absolutely used the term correctly, it's a somewhat new field of study that's looking specifically at the biochemical mechanisms that inform neurotransmitter synthesis, transmission, the enzymes that are necessary for the conversion of certain neurotransmitters into their other bioactive forms. But it's also looking at just nutrient deficiencies in general, in particular, like Vitamin D is one that gets a lot of radio play for good reason. We knew for a long time that it was important for bone health, but this idea that it's informing mental health is somewhat new to the scene. There's a lot of research to back it up anymore. But it's kind of that same concept is looking at the ways in which the foods that we're eating might inform our physiology, and then as by an extension through our psychology. And a lot of it goes back to the gut microbiome too. So thinking not just about the food as building blocks, but also thinking about the ways in which the good bugs in our bellies are informing our cravings, or even like some of our personality traits. It's really fascinating. I was looking at a paper, I think it was John Cryan's lab in Ireland had put it out a couple years ago, and they were looking at the microbiome signature of people with social anxiety, and it was really distinctive, in particular genera and particular strain. It's like very fascinating
That's
because it calls into
amazing.
question like these things about like free will and who we are and our essence, it's like how much so just to say that there's a lot of opportunity there, I think, and it can be quite empowering thinking about ways to support yourself through the foods you're eating. And, it's a privilege to be able to eat like three balanced, delicious meals every day. But if that's at all possible, I think in some cases, food and nutrition is one of the only, changeable factors. We can't always turn down the dial of stress. We can't always change the fact that we didn't get very good sleep last night because who knows what's going on. But trying to control some of the nutrient building blocks going into our body and being thoughtful about it while still allowing for flexibility, I think can be one of the most life-changing discoveries that someone can have, especially if they felt a little bit disappointed by some of the options made available through Western medicine. It feels like this is a really refreshing kind of new option available.
So, one of the things that I see the most, I come from South America. And one of the biggest things that I experience myself in the United States is that in South America, I suffer from panic attacks, and I'm very public about that. And it was after the passing of my dad. And unfortunately, at that time, panic attacks was a brand new term. And also in South America, it was a not known. So it wasn't until I came to the States 8 years later that finally somebody said, oh, it sounds like a panic attack. And I finally had in my head a term of what I was feeling. Anyway, the minute somebody discover or diagnose it as a panic attack, the minute they wanted to give me medication right away. And I was very hesitant because I come from the world of integrative health, and back home my mom was very holistic, and to be honest, I was a little bit afraid of medication right away. I kept saying why, and I kept asking, is there any other way? And it wasn't until I found a functional doctor in Orlando that his intern saw me and gave me very basic supplementation. I wish I knew exactly what it was, but I'm pretty sure it had magnesium, it had vitamin Bs, it had omegas, and they probably had a vitamin D as well. There was a little bit more than that. And I cannot kid you, it changed my life. It changed my life so much that I, for 8 years, maybe twice a day, I will suffer from panic attacks. And then it balanced me. And Jamie, I used to go to psychologists all the time. I used to do lots of therapies. All the woo-woo therapies out there, I did it because I thought that my panic attacks was coming from somewhere else, right? Like my trauma, my past, my dad. But it wasn't until I realized how impactful was to deal with my biology and my biochemistry that made a difference for me. So have you seen that in your own clients? I mean, I know my situation is like, wow, panic attacks. And it, by the way, whoever's listening, this was not like a solution in one day. It took me at least a year to get into a nice steady space. So have you seen that?
I have, and I've also experienced that firsthand, that same experience of having panic attacks and then playing around with my nutrition and figuring out a way to turn down the dial and not having panic attacks anymore, and recognizing the kind of warning feelings before it's full blown and being able to check in and figure out what's going on with me physically, which I think is so reassuring because to your point, when you don't know that there's a word for that and you don't know what's going on, it can feel really terrifying. I mean, the name itself kind of explains everything. It's an attack of panic. It's terrifying. And I think what it ended up informing for me is the importance of doing like all of the things like you're describing. It's like borrowing all of the tools, like doing talk therapy, taking pharmaceuticals as a stopgap just to get you to the other side, right? And then figuring out how to refill your stores enough so that you have the energy and you have the capacity for wanting to do the other things, the so-called lifestyle medicine, like increasing enjoyable movement, changing the way that you're eating. But when you're like dealing with that Maslow's hierarchy of needs where you're in full-on panic, the idea of like sitting down and making this gourmet multi-course meal that's like wild-caught salmon with like steamed whatever, you're like, I don't think so. I'm just trying to like make it till tomorrow. So I think just really appreciating that there's a time and a place for everything. And I think one of the tools and what I love about one of the things omega-3s is so effective at doing is increasing brain-derived neurotrophic factor, BDNF in the brain, neuroplasticity. So it's interesting because I think that's almost like a choose your own adventure. How can you increase BDNF? I think movement does that, omega-3s does that. Psychedelic assisted therapies do that. There's a lot of different ways to go about doing that. So picking the tool that makes the most sense for you, but giving your brain the opportunity to create new neural pathways and getting out of, I almost envision it like there's a wagon wheel rut, right? And the wagon wheel is stuck in it. So you got to get it out of that rut to like start taking the other path less traveled. But it's hard. And you need to kind of pull on all of the tools to figure out that perfect recipe for you with your biochemistry and really truly personalized. And I think what has felt the most successful to me in a clinical setting when I've been helping folks sort of navigate that space of wanting to improve their diet because they believe and they want to improve the way that they're feeling physically and emotionally, but they're just struggling, right? I think baby steps, small incremental goals is really, really important. And if that just looks like having like a bite of something in the morning in place of a breakfast because you don't have the appetite for it, and just doing that for a couple of weeks as a placeholder so that down the line, maybe we can start thinking about a more robust breakfast and bringing in other tools to help increase an appetite to start addressing some of the nutrient deficiencies or insufficiencies that could be informing some of what they're dealing with. I think that's really important because I think trying to do a complete dietary overhaul and do everything at once, it just sets people up to feel a lot of shame and guilt when they fall short of this like mystical perfection that doesn't exist, and I think going slowly also allows us to fine tune it a little bit and figure out a way to, okay, we'll do this for a little while, see how it goes. If it's still working, okay, what can we feather in next? Or if like we're not really quite seeing what we want to see, play around with it. It's a work in progress.
I love what you're saying, and those were going to be my next questions. So thank you for answering that, because I do see a lot of patients, and we also see it in the world of nutrition, where you're like, okay, you are suffering from anxiety or depression or panic attacks, and there's this list of all foods, right? And this is a list of all supplements, yet when you are in it, you just need to feed your body for a moment, So I wanted to ask you that if you had a specific modality or approach when you experience somebody like that, like somebody right now is experiencing, and we can, I just want to ask you these questions that way if somebody that is listening might be experiencing anxiety, depression, and they kind of know what they're supposed to do, but they don't even, they don't have that energy or what they call that spoon to even go for it. Where would you start as a practitioner? What is a recommendation that you will say?
Yeah, I think for anxiety and panic attacks in particular, my first like spidey sense that goes up is trying to determine if this person is eating enough. It's like that whole fed is best mantra, I think is really true. Before worrying too much about what's the composition of the meal, does your plate have it like this percentage is protein and this percentage is this and that? It's like, who cares about that stuff? Like, what's your relationship to food? What's your relationship to body? What's your relationship to hunger and fullness cues? And just kind of exploring that. And a lot of times folks dealing with a lot of anxiety, I know this from personal experience, maybe you do too, it can really extinguish your appetite. And so blood sugar dysregulation can become a real problem in the background, but you don't recognize you're hungry because your cortisol's through the roof. And so you're liberating enough stored glycogen to still have a baseline glucose in your blood system, but it's not bringing all of the attendant nutrients that we need to be like feeling our best. So I think I was pretty compelled to share this research I came across where people who had hypoglycemia or often like reactive hypoglycemia after having something that was like a very high glycemic index snack or meal, it was enough to trigger a panic attack in folks who had no history of an anxiety disorder at all. Like this is really, I mean, telling to me, like that relationship between blood sugar and our mood. And then kind of zooming out and looking at the relationship between all of our different hormonal systems, it kind of makes perfect sense. But when you're living it and experiencing it, you're in fight or flight. The last thing on your mind is eating something. You know, it's just going to sit there like a lump of coal in your belly. So I think trying to step back and before providing a bunch of recommendations, trying to get an idea of someone's like the arc of their day in terms of meals. What's that looking like? What was it like growing up? Did you have access to food whenever you were hungry? Was it kind of tightly controlled? Is there a history of having to ignore hunger and fullness cues for survival reasons or whatever the case may be? And then figuring out like what's going to be the most gentle and ideally like enjoyable way to integrate some of the nutrients that are going to be really beneficial in a way that doesn't feel like a huge heavy lift, because the last thing we want to do is be putting more stress on someone's shoulders. But I think the long and the short of it is I often first go to blood sugar, especially with anxiety and panic disorders, because it's so impactful.
I love that. And so once you get into that point, you know, you have a little bit of more glucose regulation into a person's body. By the way, I do believe that some of my panic attacks could have been that hypoglycemia because I was not eating at all. I remember eating watercress salads the whole time.
Yeah.
So it does, everything that Jamie is saying is amazing to me because now as an older individual, you look back and you're like, oh, and this is why we probably do what we do because we have lived those experiences. So in your experience, once you have a person a little bit more stabilized that, okay, they're nourishing, they're feeding themselves, you know, like you mentioned, maybe this is not the moment where the person is focusing on macros or that 25% protein, you know, the way that everybody is teaching how to eat. Then what's next? Is it for you more, do you see regular blood work? Do you need to do a functional test? Or is there something else that you go towards? Or is there any other unique approach that you apply as a practitioner?
Yeah, that's a really great question. I was actually just talking to one of my students during office hours the other day. She wanted to know what my favorite functional tests were. And I was like, you know, I don't run any of them. And it's not because I don't think that there's value. It's because most of my clientele is pretty low income and intentionally so. I really wanted, it's a high value of mine to make my services accessible. And so a lot of folks are on tight budgets. So what I end up often doing is recommending that they talk with their PCP or ordering a physician to integrate what I'd consider to be like nutrition related labs. So I'll say like, if your insurance will cover it, I really think, because we can know a lot really just from a CBC and a CMP, but then if we can get a vitamin D on there, I love that. If we can get a vitamin B12 on there, I love that. But generally in like thyroid panel, iron panel, lipid panel, some of the normal stuff. But in terms of like more elaborate GI maps and things like that, I don't often work with those in my practice. I've decided that I'm not sure that the results necessarily would change my overall approach, because if the overall approach is really trying to increase dietary diversity and trying to repair relationship to food and self, a lot of that can be done by the data that the person who I'm sitting across from can share about like what are the foods that they've been eating lately, what are the foods that do or don't sit well. There are situations when I would recommend supplements, and you'd probably expect which ones. It's like things that most all of us are deficient in, like magnesium, omega-3s, vitamin D, etc. But typically, a lot of my clients are also working with an ND or someone else who's like running tests pretty regularly. So it feels like that's not something I have to ask them to take on in addition to our work. So really what usually I'm looking at is ways to increase dietary diversity in a way that feels safe, because I really enjoy and feel passionate about supporting a primarily like neurodivergent client base, not completely, but a lot of the folks that I'm working with have ADHD or autism or some combination, OCD. And I really want people to feel less shame about having potential sensory sensitivities if that's what's going on for them. We can still figure out ways to increase the dietary diversity that doesn't involve like white knuckling and forcing food down that doesn't feel safe and good at that time. And also appreciating when life is especially stressful, maybe that's not the time we're going to be wanting to increase the diversity of foods, right? It's like we want to just kind of go back to basics and make sure that breakfast, lunch, and dinner is happening whenever we can. And maybe getting some sunlight in your eyes first thing in the morning to try to get circadian rhythm back online. So some more of like the foundational health and wellness principles. And I think that kind of guides a lot of why I'm doing what I'm doing. I'm really trying to kind of emphasize the simplicity and appreciate the complexity of each human without overcomplicating it, because I find that that just feels so toxic, and people get really stuck in this fear loop of like, oh, I feel like I'm not doing it right, like I should be eating, this is dietary perfection, and I just don't think that that exists. And I just think that we know stress is so toxic that if we can kind of disentangle diet culture from our approach to nutrition whenever possible, it really has the power to heal just in and of itself, you know. And then if you can add in some of the nutrients that are going to be especially supportive of a brain under stress or a body under stress or anxiety or depression, all of these different things, like bring in the best of what we know in the research, but not losing sight of the fact that we have a real human here and we have to think about like what about this protocol is going to be doable and appealing.
Yeah, and I've had probably the past 2 years, I've worked with a lot of neurodivergency and divergent clients, and they have taught me so much because I didn't understand very well how, you know, sometimes times and specific tasks felt so heavy, and it made me feel so much more mindful. So I love the way you are expressing and how we need to take it back to simplicity. So for those who might not understand a little bit about neurodivergence and divergency, can you explain what could be something that maybe a person with ADHD or maybe autism might encounter that it feels so heavy on them? Because I feel that we need to, just because of your experience, we need to expand a little bit more that capacity of understanding. I had a client the other day and told me, I had a trainer and she wanted me to take pictures of my meal. Like, she wants to lose weight and she wants to take pictures of my meals, and she will get mad at me because I didn't do this specific workouts. And I felt horrible. I would never do that to a person. But I'm like, anybody that is listening here that doesn't understand that group of individuals, can you explain how certain things could feel a little bit maybe too heavy or too much for those?
Yeah. Yeah, it really depends on the person, right? Something that I think is interesting, and I mentioned this briefly at the ANA conference, that there's a pretty high overlap between folks experiencing ADHD and folks experiencing autism. And for a long time, autism was a diagnostic exclusion of ADHD. But now a lot of my clients, and we know more, this is being appreciated in places even outside of the Portland bubble, but there's a ADHD, so people with dual diagnoses. This is really common, and something that folks on both sides of that typically end up struggling with the most around food. But again, it's really variable. It depends on the person, right? Everyone is unique. But often sensory sensitivities can be a really big challenge. So that can be things like the smell, the texture, the mouth feel, the color. And especially, I think when we're thinking about someone who's experiencing the world as an ADHDer or someone who's experiencing the world as someone with autism, the definitions we see in the DSM-5 are describing this person under stress, right? Like this isn't like who you are. This is like explaining how your specific kind of neurospiciness might behave if things weren't feeling quite right. And so the idea is trying to make sure that if someone is really struggling with, for example, like expanding their diet, instead of beating themselves up about that, zooming out and thinking like, what's going on? Like, what else is going on in my life right now? Where are the pain points? Where's the stress? And then figuring out ways to chain to things that they're already doing. You know, it's like if breakfast is happening every day, that's great. Maybe you can take your supplements then. Or if only white foods are feeling safe right now, and that's just what you kind of crave when you just need that cozy familiar factor and things just, you're feeling very overstimulated, that's great. And we can still feature mashed potatoes and mac and cheese, but maybe also like cauliflower mash or something. You know, there's like creative ways to work with someone's preferences and where they're at in that moment in time and try to build on that and build confidence and really try to show that you're not judging them from falling short of some sort of imaginary metric of what a healthy diet should look like, because it looks different for each person. But I think too, going back to the hypoglycemia piece of the puzzle, I don't know anybody who makes their best choices when they're like hangry, right? Like none of us are our best selves. I feel like it ruins friendships is like, I don't know. So trying to just remember too that if you're feeling really dysregulated, trying to think about when was the last time I ate? It doesn't matter what it is. If it's a peanut butter cup, great. You know, just like have something in you and then have your sort of faculties more like online, and you can start making the choices that feel a little bit more aligned with the way you want to feel now and later. Because that's the magic sauce, I think, is being able to feel a little bit more in charge of your faculties in the moment so that the choices you're making then are aligned with like short-term and long-term goals whenever possible, right? And that's really, ultimately very personal, whatever those goals are. But I think that to me has really strong ripple effects, because something else we know is that a lot of neurodivergent folks have other cardiometabolic challenges later in life. And so it brings to mind the question of like, why? Like, why do we see so many cardiometabolic challenges with our vulnerable population of neurodiverse folks? Some of it, I think, goes back to lack of interoception for some folks, where it's like you lose sight of hunger and fullness cues, or you get so into the thing that you're working on, which is like socially highly rewarded, right? It's like you're like killing it at work, you're like the superhuman doing all of these things, but you haven't peed for like 3 hours, and you haven't eaten in like 6 hours, you know, because you're just like so into what you're doing. So trying to get ahead of that a little bit and using things like timers and things like that, I think can really help support interoceptive awareness growth. I don't think it has to be something that always feels like a foreign concept. I think your body can learn to start sending those signals a little bit more loudly. It just takes practice. And it, honestly, I think it takes a little trust building for your body and brain to be able to trust that you're going to be providing food at these regular intervals. But I think it's worthwhile. I think it's definitely a challenge worth taking on.
Yeah, thank you so much for saying that and actually taking the conversation into exactly a point that I wanted to take it, which is so amazing. Having a conversation with you is almost like you are reading my mind in where I want to take these conversations. Because working in the corporate world myself for many years too, I did see a lot of my patients where they will feel burnout. So they experience the stress a little bit different. Mostly my autistic, ADHD, or any other neurodivergency that they might have, I would see that they will not take time to go to lunch. They will highly rewarded because they will stay to work until 6, 7 p.m. and they will just be thinking about work all day long. And yet they would come into me and telling me how they didn't have time to exercise, how they didn't have time to take lunch. And they will just feel really, really burned out. So they will experience the stress in their physical body in a different way. And for them, me telling them, okay, take 15 minutes to go and walk, they were like, no, because then you're cutting my flow of work. So if a person is feeling stuck right now, if a person is neurodivergent and is listening to this conversation, and a little bit to wrap it up, what are some few things, simple things today that this person can practice and they can start so they can start untangling themselves from that chronic burnout or stress? Yeah. Where should we go from here?
Yeah, it's tricky, isn't it? Because it's you really want to honor somebody's lived experience, and if they really feel like they do not have the time to do this or that, like their plate is completely full of all of the to-dos, I would say that they're probably right and that they don't have the time. But I also think it's almost an invitation to create the time, right? Easier said than done. But I do think the way that I frame it for myself and then also for some of my clients is for those of us who really, really love routine and sameness and predictability, it can be really helpful to couch anything new you're going to try as an experiment. So you don't have to commit to doing it, but giving your body the data to see how does it feel for you. And I think I've been really grateful for having some clients who trust me enough to try on some of these experiments, some of which include like going for, I would almost call it like microdosing exercise, right? Like going for a 5 minute walk around the block, but it's like, especially with these like high achieving folks, it's like they're used to doing everything 110%. So it's like, well, if I can't do the hour workout at the gym, why bother? And it's like, well, just go for a 5 minute walk around the block, even if it seems too simple and too silly to really have any measurable benefit. And then, like you and I would probably predict, it's like it always feels good. And then people come back and they're able to like get more done at work. Like it feels like it's actually supportive ultimately of the goal that they thought they were going to have to sort of make a trade-off in order to make time for this movement practice, for example. And I think the same thing is true for diet stuff. And I think for nutrition, expansion, that can also be really hard because you're asking someone not only to potentially spend more time on meal prep, but it's also like thinking up the meals, going to the store, the prepping it, the cleaning. It's a lot. It's a lot. And it can be really hard not to get completely lost in the, oh my God, I have no time for this. And this is going to take up all of my free time. And so I think really starting small to say, like, I just want you to get like one of those clam top of baby arugula, and I want you to put like a handful of that with everything, every meal, non-negotiable, if this person likes bitter foods decently enough, right? But things like that, where it doesn't take a bunch of extra work. And then having that experience checking in to see like how did that feel on your brain and body? How did the zip around the block feel on your brain and body? And if it felt good, let's keep doing that. And then what can we add that might be something else and just as simple so it doesn't feel like that impossible choice. I cite this one research paper that I thought was so cute, where there's a bunch of kindergartners who had ADHD who were separated into a group of kids who were going to jump on a mini trampoline for 5 minutes, and then five who weren't, and then go back to class to like do whatever cute kindergartner stuff they were doing. And the kids who jumped on the trampoline for 5 minutes were so focused. They were like so chill, emotionally like way less reactive, less restless, just all of the wonderful things. And it just took 5 minutes of jumping on this little mini trampoline. And so I don't think it really takes like the heroic big lifts that we are conditioned to think. We don't have to choose all or nothing. We can do just a little bit here and there, pick and choose. And we can pick and choose even within like the functional tools, just as we can from allopathy and functional medicine in general. It's like integrative care can really just be like a little bit of movement, a little bit of something green, a little bit, and figuring out the palette that feels best suited for you.
Yeah. And it sounds like we both agree on movement definitely is one of those things that the brain needs, and it's just so magical.
Mm-hmm.
So I am so honored to have you today. I know we can probably talk for hours because I have so many questions. So we probably do a part two. But in the meantime, how can people learn about your work? Where do you work? Do you do telehealth? Do you have social media? Tell us how they can contact you. So if they're interested in continuing further this conversation in a session with you, they can follow you.
Yes, thank you so much, Melly. I really do appreciate you having me on here so much. It feels such an honor and just such a joy to see you and speak with you more. So for folks interested, I'm based in Portland. My private practice is all telehealth, and I'm licensed in Oregon, Washington, and Florida, but I'm able to work with folks from a variety of different states too. It's all on my website, which is swordfernnutrition.com. Sword Fern Nutrition is the name of my practice. I'm also on Instagram, but kind of new to it. So not a bunch of stuff there with plans to put more and more resources. So I think that would be something to check out if you're interested. Have a couple handouts about nutrition for depression, nutrition for anxiety, nutrition for ADHD with plans for more. And that's at Sword Fern Nutrition. And then I'm on LinkedIn, Jamie-E-Menzel. And then I also have my business page on LinkedIn too, Sword Fern Nutrition. And then otherwise, usually just in the woods of the Northwest. That's where you can find me.
I love that. It's such a beautiful area. I'm going to put all your information under the description of the podcast. But I am so honored to have you. I have so many questions for the future so we can continue this conversation. And I'm just like really thankful for you to be here. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Melly. Thank you so much. I'd love to come back.
If you enjoy what you hear, subscribe and share it with someone who might need it. The more people join us, the closer we get to building a wellness community for everyone. Thank you for being here. Now let's navigate this bululu together. This podcast is not intended to diagnose, treat, cure, or prevent any condition or disease. If you need help, please seek professional care.